is taking place on the treaty territory of the Mississaugas of New Credit and the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee, Anishinaabe, and Huron-Wendat. We are grateful to have the opportunity to work in the community every day. We are very pleased to present the film this evening at the Visa Screening Room at the Princess of Wales. A big thank you to Visa Canada for providing us this beautiful opportunity. And I want to remind you that the film is eligible for the Girls People's Choice Award, so remember to vote for your favorite films at tiff.net/vote. A huge thank you to Embankment Films for providing us with the film this evening, and to the British Council for their generous support of TIFF. You're all very anxious, aren't you? You're very chatty. Trevor Nunn's latest film, Red Joan, delves into the world of Cold War espionage, loosely inspired by the biography of British KGB agent Melita Norwood. The film's story toggles between the year 2000, when retired scientist Joan Stanley, played by the fabulous Dame Judi Dench, yes, is arrested for crimes committed decades earlier. Suffice to say, this historical thriller reminds us that spies aren't always shadowy, nefarious figures. Sometimes they are the silver-haired old lady next door. Stay for the Q&A, and right now, please join me in welcoming the director, Trevor Nunn.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My invitation said wear a suit, so feeling very slightly underdressed, but very, very overjoyed to be here in Toronto, especially in this absolutely magical theatre space. I do love it. So, many thanks to TIFF. All of us concerned with Red Joan feel very privileged and very excited to have been invited here, so thank you. On the subject of the movie, I've got slightly into the habit of describing it as a relatively small film on a huge subject. So, at the end, I really look forward to hearing your responses to that subject. Thank you very much, and enjoy.
Ladies and gentlemen, let's bring back to this stage the filmmaker, Mr. Trevor Nunn. Did you want to maybe bring a few people up?
Well, no, what I should do immediately is to give myself some support. And therefore, let me call to the stage wonderful Sophie Cookson. And Mr. Stephen Campbell-Moore is with us. Come, Stephen. And finally, Teresa Svorba is with us. So, we're giving the game away. She isn't black-haired after all. But with the high heels off, she is 5 foot and a button, as Judi Dench always says. Judi Dench, Judi, how tall are you? 5 foot and a button. So.
Excellent, let's get started. We have time for a little Q&A. I'm going to start with a few questions myself, and then I'll come out to the audience. If you have a question, please raise your hand, stand up, yell it out, and keep it succinct so that we can try and get as many of them in as possible. Trevor, maybe if we can just start to sort of set the stage. Tell us about how you came to the script and what it was about the story that really attracted you to it.
We live in a random universe, don't we? And therefore, I was passing a bookshop. I saw a book that looked very, very fascinating. I bought it. I started to read it. I read it obsessively, more or less at a sitting. And these days, at the back of a book, there's an email address that allows you to give your responses. And I immediately emailed and said this should be a movie. And furthermore, Joan should be played by Judi Dench. And just 20 minutes later, in this wonderful new technological age, the writer, Jenny Rooney, emailed back and said, "Oh my God, how wonderful, the rights are still available, please, please, can we meet?" And it went from there very, very swiftly, and probably only 8 or 9 months later, we were making the movie. So, yeah.
That's a movie in itself, it seems. Can you tell us about, so Judi was immediately...
Judi was the person who came into my mind very, very, very early on in reading the book. And look, I'm very privileged because I've been working with Judi Dench off and on over decades. I was pretty lucky that just a few days after our producer, David Parfitt, had said he was very, very keen, let's try and get this off the ground, I went to see Judi in a play in London, and we went out and had dinner afterwards. And so I crept it into the conversation, and she was immediately intrigued, and therefore there was that possibility that became a definite one just a short time later.
Right. And choosing to tell the story with Judi, the older Joan, and not as opposed to starting from the very beginning and going linear. Was that something that you wanted to do right from the start?
Well, it seems to me that the older lady who is in denial, and then I mean there's a contemporary arc to the story as well as a very different arc in her memory, and the contemporary arc is to do with her son and her reputation and denial and you know the breakdown, hospital, but still somehow hanging on to her dignity. But when she speaks at the end of what her deep down intentions were, I think she is pretty much providing us with the message. Obviously, it can be argued about, it can be argued furiously about. Is loyalty to your country or to your side that much more important than the idea, the moral judgment of loyalty to your humanity, to Homo sapiens? And we discover, as we go back into her past, that she's a phenomenally intelligent young woman, and she has reached this moral judgment, and it's not a political judgment. Now, is that something we can support or something that we have to disagree with her about? That's why I think it's such a huge subject, and so amazingly, each time we turn on our television news at the moment, the notion of nuclear confrontation is back with us. I mean, one has to say, very, very alarmingly, in the language of the President of the United States of America, almost a sort of childlike who's best approach to nuclear confrontation, which is very, very distressing when we know that possibility of exterminating whole races, of exterminating the planet, could occur once nuclear bombing begins. And who could have thought that that's still on the agenda with Iran and with North Korea and with vast military exercises going on this week, with Russia demonstrating phenomenal nuclear forces and so on. It is so strange that Joan made that decision just after Hiroshima, and it hasn't gone away yet.
Right. Sophie, maybe you can talk a little bit about doing some of the research for the film. Were there a lot of other stories of other women out there that you found, or is the story of Melita?
No, well, the story of Melita Norwood is a good starting point, but Joan really does not have a communist leaning. All of the repetitive conversations with Leo, they're at odds with each other politically. And Melita Norwood was very much a communist through and through. You know, she was a member of the party her entire life. And Joan's relationship with Leo is in spite of his politics, not because of them. So I found that Jenny Rooney had written an incredible book, and the script was so full and so rich, and Joan really leaps off the page in every way. So for me, it was really doing that, and researching Judi, which is bloody fun research, and Trevor was really useful. Their relationship for the last few decades proved very, very helpful to me, getting a full, rounded vision of her.
And I'm so sorry, you switched me off. But so extraordinary and important that the story is about a woman who has that courage, a woman who has made that incredible gesture, and it's so shocking when you look at the history of it, but because there is just a kind of extra security for her at that time, because she's not going to come under suspicion, because after all, you're only a woman. I mean, it's so ironic that our other agenda at the moment is so completely opposite to that, but the story is about the courage of one particular woman.
Do we have a question from the audience? I don't want to take up the whole time. Yes, right over there. Yes.
Yes, we in Canada are probably a little bit more familiar with the Cambridge 4. They were obviously in Cambridge together. So was there a relationship between Joan and the Cambridge 4?
I'm not sure I got it.
The question is, was there a relationship between Joan and the Cambridge 4?
Oh. If we're talking about Melita Norwood, no, there wasn't a particular relationship in the original true story. Melita Norwood was part of the Tube Alloys project, but the work that she was doing was highly secret work in London rather than in Cambridge. And therefore, what the novelist has done is to take us into that territory of the Cambridge spies, the 4, or were there 5, or were there 6? I mean, that argument still goes on, and I think in the novel that scientist Keel sort of relates to Fuchs, who was unmasked. And Sir William relates to the Cambridge the Cambridge graduates who got into Foreign Office or high diplomatic positions.
Yes, right over here.
You're one of the giants of directors who have directed Shakespeare and an expert in Shakespeare. So I wonder which of the plays or which of the characters of Shakespeare is this movie comparable to in dimension?
So, this will be an interesting one. The lady was asking about how Trevor has spent a lot of time directing Shakespeare. Are there Shakespearean influences for you in directing this film?
You know, the extraordinary thing about Shakespeare was that he was a first in writing major roles, leading roles for women, and especially mature women. Whereas most of the writers contemporary with him kept women's parts very, very small. And Shakespeare writes the part of Rosalind, which is almost as long as Hamlet. In terms of this context, there is a wonderful old lady, Volumnia, the mother of Coriolanus, who has phenomenal courage and goes out to confront her son, who is at the head of an invading army, in order to save the state. And indeed, Judi Dench once played Volumnia, so that there's that kind of a connection. But also, in terms of huge intelligence, Shakespeare invests that in a character called Cleopatra, the most articulate and the most quick-witted of any character that's ever been written, also brilliantly played by Judi Dench.
Well done. Well done. I did not expect that to go where it did. Is there anyone up at the top there, just so I don't forget the group up there? I don't see a hand. Okay, whoever said yes, yes. The question is about when they came to Canada. Where was it that they came first? Before going to Montreal.
Asking me, all of these people are patiently waiting to be interrogated.
Sophie, do you know?
It's a complex story. There was complete collaboration, secret collaboration, between the British and the Americans and the Canadians, and then the Manhattan Project moved out of that group, and consequently there was no longer a sharing of information because of the fear of just the security fear. But the Canada Centre was, I believe, just outside Montreal. That there was continuous exchange during that atomic bomb development between Britain and Canada. And certainly the British would not have developed their own atomic weapon and had a seat at the table if it hadn't have been for work that was done in Canada.
Okay. Yes, over here.
To the actors, are there any challenges that are particularly unique to what I would loosely describe as doing period piece?
The question is to the actors, if there were particular challenges to doing a period piece.
Okay, I'll answer. I don't know. I think there are challenges with every job that you undertake. For me, the biggest challenge in this was, portraying a young Judi Dench, which is terrifying. No, really. And also, being loyal to Judi and and not meeting Judi until we were shooting, and hoping that Trevor was conveying both of our ideas to each other, which thank you for doing. But no, I don't think there's any specific challenges. There's things like accent.
Hair and makeup.
Yeah, but that's not a
4
challenge
a.m.
for me. Yeah, no, I don't know. How do you feel?
I think it's clearly when you're doing a character piece, when you're doing a period piece, you're often dealing with a lot of things that take precedence over character. But luckily, in this case, that wasn't the case, because I think Trevor is very key on character and making sure that you are playing the character that you're playing. And it's not just about your hair and your waistcoat or your dress or whatever. But I think one of the key things that, in my experience with period pieces, is that you shouldn't subscribe too much to the film and television lore of what that period is. That often when you see films from the 40s, they're a lot more relaxed than the films that we make now about the 40s in their behavior. And they're still just people making decisions. They do subscribe to some rules, but for the most part, they're pretty much the same.
Yes, right over here. Yeah, maybe Teresa, and how did you prepare for your role? And did you have any sort of challenges that you were worried about not portraying correctly?
I was the most concerned about, because Sonia is so ambiguous as a personality. Like we're supposed to feel some danger, but not too much. We don't want to give it away. And like the pace of it, how you should slowly pace it to the audience and make them suspicious. So, and of course you don't film chronologically. So that was kind of the work I put into that, and most of my notes, how I should reveal, and she's still a friend. And also my preparation was the book, where there's much more of a backstory and little subplots between Sonia and Joan, so that made me understand how she ticks, and that she's not pure evil. She cares about her in many ways, but then there's the cause, and there's her own agenda as well, and they're in love with the same guy. So yeah, so that was the ambiguity, the pace of it, and that was my main concern.
But in terms of accuracy of casting, the role of Sonia, she's born in Russia, and then quite young she goes to Germany, and then from Germany she comes to England. And Teresa was born in Czechoslovakia and then went to Germany and then came to England. So there's a wonderful authenticity going on there.
I hope that's the only thing we have in common. I was actually quite worried when I saw myself so evil.
Stephen, what about you?
I think the thing that I was most concerned about was seeming credible when talking about science, because the first week's rehearsal, we ended up having quite a lot of conversations about nuclear fission and what an atom was. And Trevor's very knowledgeable, so that helped. And then I did my own research and tried to get my head around it as much as possible. But anybody who's read Stephen Hawking, I know that I got about halfway through and then realized I'd hit a ceiling as far as my ability to understand was concerned. So that, basically. Yeah.
In terms of my preparedness, no, this is absolutely extraordinary. I have a son who has just become a junior professor, and he's a particle physicist. And I tell him he gets it all from me. But I think the last proper scientific conversation I was able to have with him was when he was 13. And then I got lost. I couldn't keep up with him.
We have time for one more quick question. Yes, the person waving their light up there at the top.
Yeah, my question is to everybody. Obviously, the film is bring out quite a few moral questions, but with a big question, what the actors and Trevor, obviously, what do you think Joan did do the right thing?
I will. The question is really to the actors and to Trevor. Maybe just quickly, do you think Joan did the right thing?
Good question.
Teresa, maybe we'll start with you.
I think what's really good about it is that she put things to some different perspective, and that's always a good thing to do, just like the film, to just, change the viewing point and look at things from a different angle, and then maybe be surprised by what you see, and then how it makes you think, like things that provoke questions. That's always a good thing.
Do you guys want to answer?
Yeah.
You had
honestly,
time to
I think that when you so many people don't make choices at all, and I think that something is admirable when somebody does make a choice and is in the public, or what they do ripples into the public sphere. It's a very brave thing, but I admire anybody who goes out into public and actually changes things in any way, shape, or form. They are quite courageous. But whether she did the right or wrong thing, I don't think any of us can necessarily judge.
Well, as the person playing her, I have nothing but respect for her, really, and I can't personally imagine being that courageous. And she's this young girl, completely naive, that's found herself in a position of such power, and she fundamentally believes she's doing the right thing, and I can't help but feel that if you truly believe something, you should act on it. So therefore, yes, I do think she did the right thing.
Maybe I should just underline the fact it's there in the film. During that time when our character made that decision, had she have been caught and put on trial, the punishment would have been hanging by the neck. I mean, that's what she was risking. There was no other punishment. If you are guilty of treason, you will hang. So it's at that level that she is taking that decision. Now, next thing to be said is I really, really hope when people have seen this movie that what they will do is go away and argue. I'm sure that people will have different views. People will have had different experiences, have a different sense of what loyalty is, or what the East-West conflict has been. And I think it's important that the issue should be argued rather than just everybody goes along with the propagandist conclusion. But just finally, I would say that when we look at the history of our species, of Homo sapiens, we see over and over again that when people feel themselves to be stronger, when they're bigger or heavier or more powerful, or they have more weaponry, or they have a bigger army, or they have bigger armaments, they use them because there is that sense of we can win this. What happened at that moment when the West and the East both possessed nuclear weapons that could entirely obliterate the other side? One side presses the button in the knowledge that 30 seconds later the other side will press the button. So you are bringing destruction on your own side if you wish destruction on the other. And therefore, what Joan says at the end of the film, they haven't used it for 50 years, have they, is not part of the argument. They haven't. Whether anyone will be foolish enough to do such a thing in the future is also alarmingly still part of the argument.
Thank you, Trevor. Thank you all so much for being here. Ladies and gentlemen, Teresa, Stephen, Sophie, and our filmmaker, Trevor Mann.
Thank you.